Israel has cut off the supply of electricity to the Gaza Strip, and the next step will be cutting off water supplies to the northern part of Gaza if Hamas does not get serious and release the remaining hostages. But so far, they show no signs of getting serious, having rejected all proposals for a way forward that does not align with their maximalist demands. After the Hamas spokesperson said that the terror organization wants to enter the second phase of the deal with new commitments, an Israeli source said that Hamas does not agree to the Witkoff outline nor to extend the ceasefire based on Phase A. And meanwhile, United States envoy Adam Bochler, who led the talks with Hamas last week, stated that more meetings with the terror organization may take place down the line, but noted that no concessions would be made. The stated goal of Bochler's negotiations are to persuade Hamas to agree to the Witkoff outline, which includes the release of Idan Alexander and 9 hostages who suffer from torture. And meanwhile, despite the ceasefire, there was some kinetic activity inside the Gaza Strip, active fighting over the last 24 hours as terrorists who attempted to plant explosives near IDF troops were eliminated by airstrikes of the Israeli Air Force. And in the north, the world is watching in horror as Syria once again descends into sectarian violence and asking who is responsible for this bloodbath. The IDF is closely monitoring these events and preparing for every scenario, including the possibility of confrontation with the HTS regime that rules Damascus and Syria. In a related development, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has taken a deeply hostile move against Israel, threatening to use its membership in the NATO alliance to block Israeli cooperation with Europe. And to the south, Israel is preparing for the renewed activity of the war with the Houthis. And according to information reaching Jerusalem, the rebels in Yemen set the ultimatum for renewing the maritime blockade to apply pressure amid preparations for a return to fighting in Gaza. Hovering all of these developments is an escalation of the timetable for a direct confrontation with Iran, which is rejecting all offers to reaching a diplomatic settlement with the United States and is instead marching forward at full speed on its nuclear weapons program. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 521 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region who are acting under the control of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to invite you to click that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And after United States President Donald Trump met last week with Israeli hostages who had been released from captivity, he told reporters that all the hostages told of the abuse that they experienced while being in terrorist captivity of Hamas. He emphasized that although he would have expected someone in Gaza to assist the hostages, none of them recounted any such case. President Trump has made several statements of resolute support for Israel, but at the same time his negotiators are continuing to meet with Hamas in a parallel track effort to secure the release of American citizens held hostage in Gaza. There are also hints being dropped by administration officials that direct United States military action against Hamas is a possibility if the negotiations fail to produce results. However, Israel is also taking direct action to increase pressure on Hamas. Energy Minister Eli Cohen instructed the Electric Corporation to stop transferring electricity to the Gaza Strip on Sunday. Currently, Israel supplies electricity directly to water desalination facility in central Gaza, and government sources have said that the next step will be cutting off water to the northern part of Gaza. United States President Donald Trump's envoy for hostage affairs, Adam Bochler, who led the talks with the Hamas terror organization last week, announced that additional meetings with the terror organization might take place down the line, but noted that there would be no concessions. He added that there is a solution. Hamas lays down its weapons, we carry out a prisoner exchange, and move on to a long ceasefire. He also revealed on Sunday that the proposals Hamas made in the direct talks he held with its senior officials, effectively hinting that the United States is not ruling out a hudna, a truce, between the terror organization and Israel for several years. For the interviews he gave, it emerges that the statement attributed to an Israeli source, according to which his contacts with Hamas for the release of the American hostages failed, was in some sense accurate. The negotiations that Bochler led reportedly exploded the possibility of a long-term ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages through direct contact with Hamas. Bochler emphasizes that the United States has its own interests, chief amongst them bringing American citizens home. And at the same time, President Trump is threatening that if no solution is reached, Hamas will face annihilation. And former United States Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, strongly opposes any agreement with Hamas, demanding its complete surrender. With all of this in mind, the United States is now considering a framework known as the Witkoff Outline, which involves releasing 10 hostages and renewing humanitarian assistance to Gaza in exchange for a 60-day ceasefire. This is how Washington tries to maintain its security and humanitarian interests in the area, and Israel will have to adjust itself accordingly. In case anyone involved in these negotiations watches boots on the ground, I will offer a gentle reminder that the word hudna in Arabic does not really mean exactly the same thing as ceasefire in English. This word refers to a period of time when there is no active fighting going on, but this break in active combat is not meant to be a preparation for peace, but rather it is meant to be a period of preparations for a return to fighting and to war. Israel has had many periods of hudna with our enemies, and sooner rather than later, all of them carried out attacks on us, on the Jewish state, and we find ourselves back in open war with them. And speaking of which, contrary to the claims by Hamas leaders that talks on phase B of the ceasefire and the hostage deal are progressing, here in Israel, officials are advising that we lower our expectations. An Israeli source familiar with the contacts clarified that there is no progress in the talks with Hamas, saying rather that Israel is sending a delegation to Qatar in order to give the United States and the mediators a chance to discuss a bridging proposal for continuing the temporary ceasefire. And meanwhile, Hamas is not agreeing to any proposal raised in discussions with it. Not to the Witkoff outline, not to an extension of the ceasefire based on Phase A's outline, and this is the situation on the ground. Hamas also refuses to discuss Phase B, based on Israel's known demands, including Hamas's disarmament, the expulsion of Hamas leadership and the terror organization's command echelon, and the denial of civilian and military control of the Gaza Strip. Hamas insists on remaining in Gaza and demands that Israel leave the Strip completely and permanently and commit not to return to war. Israel has repeatedly clarified that we cannot and will not agree to these maximalist demands. Instead, alongside stopping the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, Israel is preparing for intense war against Hamas if it does not wise up and release all of our hostages. Israel is preparing a plan of action in the Gaza Strip in the form of airstrikes and tactical raids on Hamas targets, while at the same time getting ready to relocate hundreds of thousands of Gazans who returned to the northern part of the Gaza Strip back to the south. If the IDF is ordered to enter Gaza again, the maneuver will be carried out with a large military force, larger than before, and the objective of the maneuver will also be entirely different: the occupation of territory and holding it over time while attacking Hamas targets and eliminating the organization. The understanding in Israel is that this is only a matter of time, and at this point it cannot be avoided. The fact that Hamas still holds 59 hostages, of which at least 22 are alive, while insisting on permanently ending the war, will leave Israel with no choice but to fully conquer the Gaza Strip and hold it for a very long time. However, the intelligence echelon believes that there is a low chance that the IDF would be required to carry out another maneuver in Gaza without first concluding a deal for the release of the remaining living hostages, because Israel still has leverage to apply pressure on Hamas before returning to another round of fighting. And in recent days, the IDF has been carried out training and re-equipping of units that are supposed to take part in the Gaza maneuver. On the other side, Hamas appears to also be making preparations, organizing and training their new recruits, distributing whatever weapons and ammunition they still have, and preparing booby traps and firing positions against our forces. Arab media portals also reported that the IDF has confirmed that in the last 24 hours there have been airstrikes on Hamas terrorists who were attempting to plant explosives near IDF troops in the Gaza Strip. Also, on Sunday, the IDF spokesperson's unit said that overnight a drone detected crossings from Israeli territory into the southern Gaza Strip. The drone was under surveillance throughout its flight. An Air Force aircraft of the IDF attacked earlier today the drone and several suspects who collected it in the southern part of Gaza. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development regarding events in the Gaza Strip moving forward. And as always, we ask you to continue spreading the truth by sharing our videos on YouTube and following us on social media. Most importantly, click that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth and know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Before we move on, I have to clarify a few things about the possible return of hostilities to the Gaza Strip. Many of you are probably wondering why this would be necessary after almost a year and a half of fighting. The answer is that Hamas does not believe it has been defeated, and they are actively preparing for another attack against Israel with the help and the encouragement of Iran. It is still very far from approaching its capabilities from the morning of October 7th, but it is working vigorously in several directions. Firstly, on the tactical level, its men are trying to create a fire obstacle that includes laying IEDs and planting mines in wide areas throughout the Gaza Strip, aiming to use them when the IDF moves back into the area. And Hamas is also carrying out broad campaigns of recruitment to fill up its ranks. Its leverage over the population is of course the humanitarian aid. It distributes the bread and water and can recruit whoever it wants by promising extra supplies for them, for their families, and in order for the children to join the ranks. The average age of a Hamas terrorist is 16 and a half years old. And I'm talking about average, meaning many are younger than that age. However, the most significant recent action is restoring its fire capabilities and its terror tunnels. Although not on a large scale, it is happening on the ground in Gaza. Hamas demonstrates confidence in the field, trying to approach IDF forces under cover of the ceasefire, conducting surveillance on them, gathering intelligence, and preparing. The IDF is now in the field, in the most complex situation. It's engaged in defensive fighting during a ceasefire. This combination requires the fighters to be on alert, watchful, and sharp, keeping in mind that another round of combat is necessary and inevitable because Hamas has not been defeated and it is not ready to quit. It is still preparing for future attacks against Israel, and it still holds Israeli hostages. The Israeli public is demanding that these hostages be released, and the government can't ignore these demands. Hamas knows that, and it is applying maximum pressure on this sensitive point. But the IDF also knows that the goal of defeating Hamas is possible, but it is also likely to mean that the war's other main goal of returning all the hostages will not be achieved. Some of them have already been lost, died in captivity, while others have been murdered. It is not unlikely that more will be lost before this is over. And in the meantime, the IDF is using every minute from now until the inevitable return to active fighting to prepare, train, re-equip, and review lessons learned from the first round of fighting in Gaza. The coming days are critical for the future of the hostages amidst the possibility of a maneuver in Gaza within the next 2 weeks. So, stay tuned to the truth and help us spread it. And most importantly, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. The war may be on hold, but the threat hasn't gone away. Terror can strike anywhere, anytime. Hamas, Hezbollah, and lone attackers are still targeting civilians on buses, in markets, in everyday life. Just days ago, Haifa's central bus station became the latest target. A terrorist stabbed 5 people. 1 man didn't survive. The wounded needed urgent care. Every second counted. Magen David Adom was there in minutes. Paramedics stopped the bleeding, stabilized the injured, and rushed them to the hospital. Lives were saved because Magen David Adom was ready. And thanks to your support, they can keep saving lives. More ambulances, medical supplies, and trained responders mean that Magen David Adom will be there when the next emergency happens. So make sure that they have what they need. Donate now at www.savelifeisrael.com. Now, back to the news and shifting our focus to the northern arena. The IDF is monitoring the severe clashes between the Assad loyalists and the regime in Syria and is preparing for any possible scenario. The situation has drawn outrage from around the world as videos have surfaced showing horrific scenes of murder, and even the United Nations has issued reports about executions of entire families. The official death toll in Syria has risen to over 1,000 people, most of whom were unarmed civilians from the Alawite majority. This is the same majority that Assad was from, who were slaughtered in acts of revenge by the new regime's forces and armed militia groups that assisted them. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir arrived at the buffer zone in Syria on Sunday morning for a closer look at the situation. He came to the Golan Division and closely followed the assessment of forces in the northeastern border area, receiving briefings on what is happening deep inside Syrian territory. An IDF source said that we are not surprised by the scope of the events and their intensity. We already knew months ago when the coup in Syria began that these things would happen and would not stop. This is exactly why the IDF acted in the way it did in an attempt to prevent weapons from reaching various elements that could endanger Israel, while simultaneously entering the demilitarized zone and seizing forward positions to prevent such elements from reaching the Israeli border. The IDF says that as of now there is no change in the Israeli deployment in Syria and that the IDF is not preparing to intervene in Syria's internal affairs. However, according to the military source, the political echelon made it clear that Israel will not allow the harm to the Druze community which live in villages south of Damascus. The IDF notes that this is a declaration from the political echelon, and so far, the IDF has not been tested in this regard since the new regime forces have not advanced with significant action against the Druze communities in the border with Israel. It is important to remember that when the IDF entered the buffer zone, it was clear that the new regime would not stop in Damascus or in the country's administrative centers. The jihadist ideology of HTS demands a global caliphate, and that includes taking over Israel and marching on Jerusalem sooner or later. It is likely to be a very long time before they're ready to try doing that, as there are a lot of things that they need to take care of inside Syria before making plans beyond it. But, as we can see from their activities in recent days, they're not wasting any time wiping out their internal enemies. We should not expect them to treat us any better, and so we have to prepare accordingly, and that includes setting up a defensive posture between their forces and the Israeli border that will stop them from advancing south. We're at the bottom of their list of priorities, but we are on that list. So here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development regarding the situation in Syria, and we remind you that the Jewish people and the people of Israel are bound by a treaty from biblical times, when the prophet Yitro and Moses made an agreement. So it's important that you continue spreading the truth and showing the world the truth and what really is happening in Israel and with the people of Israel. And speaking of the Middle Eastern relationships, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan continues to pursue a hostile line towards Israel, attempting to thwart its partnerships with NATO. In the past, he tried to block Sweden and Finland's entry into the alliance in order to fulfill its political ambitions, and now he threatens to also block Israeli initiatives. This highlights Ankara's cynicism as it holds NATO hostage in order to try and obtain approval to buy new fighter jets and other weapons from a reluctant America. And meanwhile, Erdogan provides unwavering support to Hamas, a murderous terrorist organization, instead of fostering regional peace relationships. This support endangers regional stability and harms the alliance's security interests. Israel, a reliable partner to NATO in the fight against terrorism and intelligence sharing, is confronted with an Islamist dictator ready to sacrifice shared interests in favor of a personal, extreme anti-Israel agenda. And additionally, Turkey's military possibly joining actions against Israel following his threats is a cause for concern and requires collective actions. This policy necessitates a firm response from NATO member states. In order to help you understand the latest developments in this region, TBN Israel has developed a news website that you can check in between the videos. The website is updated daily with current, detailed content about what's happening in Israel, as well as in-depth coverage and real-time reports. So guys, go to tbnisrael.com and stay tuned to the truth in real time. We conclude today's report by checking in on the threat from the Houthis in Yemen, who have intensified their threats against Israel, both by resuming maritime activities and potentially renewing missile fire against the Jewish state. Information reaching Jerusalem indicates that the ultimatum that they set to resume blocking ships if aid is not renewed to the Gaza Strip was made at Hamas's request, which seeks to coordinate forces against Israel. Jerusalem is preparing for the possibility that these threats will materialize and is coordinating with the United States Central Command for a possible response. The Trump administration has already designated the Houthis as a terrorist organization and imposed sanctions against them, and Israel is counting on an even harsher response from the United States. Since the outbreak of the war, Israel has attacked Houthi targets in Yemen multiple times, causing significant damage to the organization's infrastructure. And nevertheless, the rebels continue to threaten to impose the naval blockade if their demands are not met. This is a move that could undermine regional security stability. But before we finish, I want to touch on the biggest topic on the table, the Iranian nuclear weapons program. I believe it's time to halt all attempts at negotiations with Iran, as the Ayatollah regime repeatedly violates international commitments while pursuing nuclear weapons and supporting regional terrorism. The only solution is the comprehensive dismantling of all enrichment capabilities, missile systems, and nuclear research before any further conversation. The time for talking is over, and it's time for action. A partial agreement will only strengthen Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and allow it to continue secretly advancing the nuclear projects and its support for regional proxy groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis. Israel must prepare for military action together with the United States in order to bolster whatever hopes there still are for a diplomatic solution, and also to be prepared for the next step if diplomacy completely breaks down. The lesson from the 2015 agreement is clear. The legitimacy granted to Tehran only served to advance its nuclear program. We must not allow this to happen again. Effective deterrence and resolute response are needed to protect the security of Israel and the entire region. So, keep spreading the truth, and most importantly, pray. Pray for the hostages in the Gaza Strip who are held by Hamas. Pray for their swift release and safe return home. Pray for the IDF soldiers wherever they are, if they're fighting in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, or in Judea and Samaria. And pray for peace for the people of Israel and for all the citizens that are affected by these terrorists in this region. And most importantly, unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. And together, we will win this war because God is on our side.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.